60 million years ago, in a swamp that would one day become a coal mine in northern Colombia, a snake longer than a school bus swallowed crocodilians whole. Its vertebrae sat in the rock for millions of years, and when scientists finally pulled them out and measured them, the numbers were so extreme that the first reaction from the research team was disbelief. They remeasured. Same result. The creature was real, and it had no business being that large, not according to any model of reptile biology that existed at the time. That discovery alone would be enough to put Colombia on the map of unsettling scientific finds. But it is only the beginning. Because Colombia, a country roughly twice the size of France, split between the Andes, the Amazon, and two oceans, has been quietly producing discoveries that range from the baffling to the genuinely unnerving. And most people have never heard about them.
Today, we are going to look at 7 real, documented, and verified finds from Colombian soil, Colombian waters, and Colombian mountains that raise questions nobody has fully answered yet. Let's start underground. Not in a cave, not in a mine, but in a place that sits somewhere between the two. A coal deposit in the northeast corner of Colombia called the Cerrejón Formation. This is one of the largest open-pit coal mines on the planet, stretching across the arid scrubland of La Guajira. The mine itself has been operating since the 1980s, and for years, workers and geologists had been noticing fossils embedded in the layers of rock they were blasting through. Leaf impressions, turtle shells, fragments of ancient crocodilian jaws. Nobody paid much attention because tropical fossil beds of that age, Paleocene, roughly 58 to 60 million years ago, tend to produce exactly that kind of material. Then, around 2004, a geology student named Edwin Cadena noticed something different. A set of vertebrae. Large vertebrae. Larger than anything he had seen in a textbook. He flagged them. The specimens made their way to Jonathan Block, a vertebrate paleontologist at the University of Florida, and Carlos Jaramillo, a paleobotanist at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama. What followed was years of careful excavation, measurement, and comparative analysis across dozens of vertebral specimens recovered from the site. In 2009, the team published their findings in the journal Nature. The snake they described, Titanoboa cerrejonensis, was estimated to have reached lengths of approximately 13 meters, with some individuals possibly stretching closer to 14. That is roughly 42 to 46 feet. To put that in proportion, the largest living snake species, the reticulated python, occasionally reaches about 7 meters. Titanoboa was nearly double that. Its body, at the thickest point, would have been about a meter in diameter. The estimated weight came out to roughly 1,135 kilograms, nearly 2,500 pounds. That is heavier than a grand piano. Heavier, in fact, than a full-grown polar bear. Now, size alone is impressive, but what made this discovery genuinely unsettling for the scientific community was what the size implied about the environment. Snakes are ectotherms. Their maximum body size is closely correlated with ambient temperature. The math, based on models developed by researchers like Mark Denny and later refined by Jason Head, the lead author of the 2009 paper, suggested that for a cold-blooded reptile to reach the dimensions of Titanoboa, the average annual temperature of its habitat would have had to be around 30 to 34 degrees Celsius. That is significantly hotter than the modern tropics, and it was happening during a period that was already supposed to be warm, the Paleocene thermal maximum, but perhaps not quite that warm. This forced a recalibration. Either the climate models for the early Paleocene were underestimating equatorial temperatures, or the biological models linking snake size to temperature were missing something. A follow-up study by Head and others in 2013 explored the possibility that Titanoboa's metabolism might not have followed the standard ectotherm rulebook so neatly, but the question is still not settled. What is settled is that this creature existed, that Colombia's ancient swamps supported an apex predator the likes of which we have no modern equivalent for, and that it took a coal mine, one of the most destructive forms of industrial extraction, to accidentally reveal one of the most extraordinary animals that ever lived.
The replica skeleton that was built for the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History in Washington stretches the length of a city bus. When visitors stand next to it, most of them stop talking. Speaking of silence, there is a place in Colombia where silence is almost aggressive.
The Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta is the tallest coastal mountain range on Earth. Its peaks rise to over 5,700 meters, and they do it within just 42 kilometers of the Caribbean shoreline. The lower slopes are wrapped in dense tropical forest, so thick that even satellite imagery struggles to map it properly. And hidden deep inside that forest, at an altitude of roughly 900 to 1,300 meters, sits a city that most of the world did not know existed until 1972. The Tairona people called it Tayuna. Today, it is known as Ciudad Perdida, the lost city. And there is something deeply strange about how it was found. In the early 1970s, a group of local treasure hunters, known in Colombia as guaqueros, stumbled onto a series of stone steps while moving through the jungle. They followed the steps upward and found themselves standing on massive stone terraces carved into the mountainside, connected by an elaborate network of stairways, pathways, and drainage channels. The guaqueros did what guaqueros do.
They looted. Gold figurines, ceramic urns, beads, and carved objects started appearing on the black market in the coastal city of Santa Marta. The artifacts were so distinctive and so numerous that within a few years, Colombian archaeologists caught wind of what was happening and organized an official expedition. What they found was staggering. Ciudad Perdida is not a ruin in the way most people imagine ruins. It is a full-scale urban settlement covering about 13 hectares across a series of ridges and slopes. There are at least 169 stone terraces, many of them circular, connected by a network of tiled roads and stone staircases. The terraces were not ceremonial platforms. They were foundations for houses, workshops, storage facilities, and communal spaces. The drainage engineering alone is remarkable. Every terrace has channels cut into the stone to redirect rainwater away from living surfaces and down the mountainside without causing erosion.
In a region that receives over 4,000 millimeters of rainfall per year, that kind of water management was not optional. It was survival. The city was built around 800 CE. That makes it roughly 660 years older than Machu Picchu. And yet, outside of Colombia, almost no one talks about it. The Tairona civilization that built Tayuna was sophisticated. They were goldsmiths, road builders, hydraulic engineers, and farmers who mastered terrace agriculture in steep mountain terrain. Their descendants, the Kogi, the Wiwa, the Arhuaco, and the Canquamo, still live in the Sierra Nevada today and still consider the site sacred. The Kogi, in particular, have repeatedly asked the Colombian government and international organizations to restrict tourism at the site, arguing that outsiders damage the spiritual and physical integrity of the area. As of recent years, access is limited to guided treks, typically 4 to 6 days through jungle trails, and visitor numbers are capped, though enforcement varies. Here is what lingers. The Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta has only been partially surveyed. LiDAR scanning, the same technology that revealed enormous Maya settlements beneath the Guatemalan jungle, has been proposed for the region but has not yet been applied comprehensively. Archaeologists working in the area, including Alejandro de Ver and Santiago Giraldo, have suggested that Tayuna may be just one node in a much larger network of Tairona settlements, most of which remain undiscovered beneath the canopy. The forest is that thick. The mountains are that remote. And Colombia's decades-long internal conflict made large parts of the Sierra Nevada too dangerous for fieldwork until relatively recently. What else is under that canopy? What other cities? What other roads? Nobody knows yet.
And that should bother us more than it does. If the jungle hides cities, the ocean hides fortunes.
And no fortune in Colombia's waters has generated more controversy, more legal conflict, and more sheer bewilderment than the wreck of the San Jose. The San Jose was a 62-gun Spanish galleon, one of the largest warships in the Spanish fleet at the turn of the 18th century.
On June 8, 1708, it was sailing north along the Colombian coast, near the Baru Peninsula, just south of Cartagena. Its holds were full. The ship was carrying the collected tax revenues and trade wealth of the Spanish colonies in South America. Gold bars, silver coins, chests of emeralds from the Muzo mines, and possibly Chinese porcelain that had crossed the Pacific on the Manila galleon trade route. The San Jose was heading for Spain. It never arrived. A small English squadron under the command of Commodore Charles Wager intercepted the Spanish convoy. In the battle that followed, the San Jose exploded, most likely when a British cannonball struck the ship's powder magazine, and sank within minutes. Nearly all 600 crew members died. The treasure went to the bottom. For 3 centuries, the wreck sat somewhere in the deep water off Cartagena. Estimates of its value, depending on who you ask and how you calculate it, range from about $4 billion to over $17 billion US dollars. That makes the San Jose, by some measures, the single most valuable shipwreck ever discovered. The Colombian government announced in December 2015 that the wreck had been located at a depth of roughly 600 meters. President Juan Manuel Santos called it the most important find in the history of underwater heritage. The Navy released sonar images showing cannon on the seafloor and what appeared to be intact sections of the hull. In 2022 and again in 2024, the Colombian government deployed remotely operated vehicles to the site and captured high-definition video of the wreck. The footage shows an astonishing state of preservation. Bronze cannon with dolphin-shaped handles still resting in their original positions, intact ceramic vessels, and what appear to be gold artifacts scattered in the sediment. What do you think lies at the bottom of the San Jose? Evidence of colonial plunder that should stay in Colombia? Or historical heritage that belongs to the descendants of the sailors who died there? This is one of those questions where every answer opens another argument. Drop your take in the comments. The legal situation around the San Jose is, to use a mild word, complicated. Colombia claims the wreck as part of its sovereign underwater patrimony. Spain argues that the San Jose was a Spanish naval vessel, and that under international law, warships never lose their sovereign immunity, regardless of where they sink. And then there is a US-based salvage company, Sea Search Armada, which claims it identified the wreck's location decades before Colombia's announcement, in the early 1980s, and that it is owed a share of whatever is recovered under a contract signed with the Colombian government at the time. Colombia has denied this, and the case has wound through Colombian and American courts for years. Meanwhile, the treasure sits untouched. The Colombian government has spoken repeatedly about building a museum and conservation center in Cartagena to house whatever is recovered, but the legal disputes have delayed any full-scale salvage operation. Archaeologists, including those at UNESCO, have urged caution. Deep-sea recovery at 600 meters is technically demanding, and rushing the process for political or financial reasons could destroy irreplaceable archaeological context. The wreck is not just gold. It is a time capsule of early 18th century Atlantic trade, colonial economics, naval warfare, and human loss. Every artifact has a story, and the moment you haul something to the surface without documenting its exact position, you erase part of that story forever. As of now, the San Jose remains where it sank, guarded by the Colombian Navy, watched by lawyers, and untouched by human hands for over 300 years. From the ocean floor, let us move to the walls of a cliff deep in the Colombian Amazon, where someone, a very long time ago, painted thousands of images on rock faces that most human beings have never seen. The Serranía de Chiribiquete is a series of flat-topped sandstone mountains, known as tepuis, rising out of the Amazon basin in the departments of Caquetá and Guaviare in south-central Colombia. The region is extraordinarily remote. There are no roads. Access is largely by river and small aircraft, and for decades, the area was controlled by armed groups, making scientific exploration effectively impossible. Chiribiquete was declared a national park in 1989, and in 2018, UNESCO designated it a World Heritage Site. But even now, much of the park, which covers roughly 4.3 million hectares, making it larger than Switzerland, has never been surveyed on foot. What has been documented is staggering. On the vertical rock faces of the tepuis, researchers have cataloged more than 75,000 individual paintings. Some estimates run much higher. The paintings span an enormous range of time. The oldest are believed to date back at least 20,000 years, with some researchers, including Colombian archaeologist Carlos Castaño Uribe, who has spent decades studying the site, arguing that the earliest images could be even older. The most recent paintings may date to the period just before or during early European contact. The imagery is varied. There are jaguars, tapirs, deer, monkeys, snakes, and birds. There are human figures in elaborate poses, dancing, hunting, running, and engaged in what appear to be rituals. There are handprints, geometric patterns, what seem to be depictions of large-scale group activities involving dozens or hundreds of participants. And there are images of animals that are difficult to identify, shapes that do not correspond neatly to any species living in the Amazon today.
Castaño Uribe has described Chiribiquete as the Sistine Chapel of the Amazon. And the comparison is not about artistic style. It is about scale and density. The sheer volume of imagery compressed onto these rock faces is almost without precedent in global rock art. Comparisons with Lascaux in France or Altamira in Spain are inevitable, but those sites contain hundreds of images. Chiribiquete contains tens of thousands. The pigments used are primarily red, made from iron oxide mixed with plant-based binders. The placement of the paintings, high on cliff faces, in locations that would have required scaffolding, climbing, or rope systems to reach, raises its own set of questions. Why paint in places that are nearly inaccessible? Some researchers have suggested the elevation was intentional, meant to place the images closer to the sky, or to protect them from flooding. Others think the positioning itself was part of a ritual, that the difficulty of reaching the painting surface was the point. What makes Chiribiquete especially important, beyond its age and scale, is what it might tell us about human migration into the Americas. The oldest paintings at the site push the confirmed human presence in the Amazon basin deep into the last ice age. If the dating holds, it complicates older models that assumed human groups moved through the Americas primarily along coastal routes and only penetrated the interior much later. The park remains largely closed to the public. Access is restricted, both for conservation reasons and because of lingering security concerns. Most of what we know about the paintings comes from aerial surveys, limited ground expeditions, and Castaño Uribe's research. Entire cliff faces have been photographed from helicopters but never examined up close. What else is on those walls? What has not been photographed yet? In a park the size of a small country, the honest answer is, we have no idea. If you are the kind of person who finds yourself going down these rabbit holes at 2 in the morning, wondering what is still hidden in the places nobody is looking, subscribe to this channel. Because what we have covered so far is barely the surface, and Colombia keeps turning up things that rewrite entire chapters. Now, let us go underground again, but this time, the space was not carved by nature. It was carved by people, and it was carved to hold their dead. In the mountains of southwestern Colombia, in the department of Cauca, there is a narrow valley called Tierra Dentro. The name, fittingly, translates to land within, an interior place, hard to reach, surrounded by ridgelines and cut by the Payas River. This is Nasa territory. The indigenous Nasa people have lived in this region for centuries, and the landscape is part of their living cultural memory. But the structures buried beneath the hilltops were not made by the Nasa. They were made by someone older, someone whose name we do not know. Scattered across the hillsides of Tierra Dentro are over 100 underground burial chambers known as hypogaea. They were carved directly into the volcanic tuff, soft, compacted ash from ancient eruptions, and they date to roughly the 6th through the 10th century CE. UNESCO designated them a World Heritage Site in 1995, alongside the nearby archaeological park at San Agustin.
But while San Agustin is relatively well known for its massive stone statues, Tierra Dentro remains obscure, even among people who follow archaeology closely. The chambers vary in size. The smallest are simple oval pits, 2 or 3 meters deep, large enough for a single burial. The largest are architectural spaces, oval or circular rooms up to 12 meters wide and 7 meters deep, with carved columns, niches cut into the walls, and ceilings shaped into domes or barrel vaults. Several of the larger chambers have multiple connected rooms, accessed by spiral staircases carved directly out of the rock. And then there are the paintings. The walls and ceilings of the larger hypogaea are covered in geometric murals, patterns of diamonds, triangles, concentric circles, zigzags, and anthropomorphic faces painted in red, black, white, and occasionally orange. The designs are precise, the symmetry is careful, and the visual effect, when you descend into one of these painted chambers and stand in the dim light at the bottom of a stone staircase carved 1,000 years ago, is genuinely unsettling. What unsettles is not the imagery itself, but the implications. These are not simple graves.
The effort required to carve a 12-meter chamber out of volcanic rock, sculpt internal columns, design a staircase that spirals downward through solid stone, and then paint the entire interior with elaborate geometric designs. That effort is enormous. It implies organized labor, skilled artisans, access to pigments and binders, and a belief system that demanded this level of investment in the architecture of death. And we do not know who these people were. Not with certainty. The culture that created the hypogaea left no written language. Their relationship to the later NASA inhabitants of the valley is unclear. The burials themselves were secondary, meaning the bodies were first buried or exposed elsewhere, and only later the bones were moved into the chambers. Some of the hypogaea contain the remains of dozens of individuals, mixed together with ceramic urns, gold ornaments, and stone tools. Several of the chambers were looted long before archaeologists arrived. What survives is fragmentary, and conservation is an ongoing challenge. The volcanic tuff is soft and porous. Water seeps in. The paintings fade. Earthquakes in the region, this is an active seismic zone, have cracked walls and shifted staircases. Restoring a painted underground chamber carved into a hillside in a remote valley with limited infrastructure is exactly as difficult as it sounds. There is a particular chamber, known as Segovia, at the site called Alto de Segovia, that stops most visitors in their tracks. Its ceiling is painted in a pattern of interlocking red and black diamonds that radiates outward from the center like a mandala. The precision of the geometry, given the curved surface and the tools available, is hard to explain casually. These were not people doodling on a wall. This was architectural design, executed underground, 1,000 years before Colombia existed. From the chambers of the dead to the gold of the living. One of the most famous objects in any museum in South America sits behind glass in the Museo del Oro in Bogotá. It is small. It is made of gold. And depending on who you ask, it is either a perfect representation of a ceremonial raft or one piece of evidence in a 500-year-old treasure hunt that destroyed a lake, consumed an empire, and warped European history. The Muisca raft, La Balsa Muisca, is a gold alloy sculpture about 19.5 centimeters long and roughly 10 centimeters wide. It was found in 1969 inside a ceramic vessel in a small cave near the town of Pasca, in the highlands south of Bogotá. The figurine depicts a flat raft carrying several standing figures. The central figure is larger than the others, adorned with a headdress and flanked by attendants. The entire scene is rendered in the tumbaga technique, an alloy of gold and copper that the Muisca and other pre-Columbian cultures mastered to remarkable effect. What the raft depicts is the investiture ceremony of a new Zipa, or ruler, of the Muisca Confederation. The ceremony took place at Lake Guatavita, a nearly circular crater lake sitting at about 3,100 meters above sea level, roughly 50 kilometers northeast of modern Bogotá. According to accounts recorded by Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century, most notably Juan Rodríguez Fraile, who described the ceremony in his chronicle El Carnero,
The new ruler was stripped naked, covered in a sticky resin, and then coated in gold dust. He was placed on a raft alongside piles of gold and emeralds and paddled to the center of the lake, where he washed the gold dust from his body and the attendants threw the offerings into the water. This is the origin of the El Dorado legend. Not a city of gold, not a kingdom. A man covered in gold, standing on a raft in the middle of a mountain lake. The Spanish, predictably, heard gold and stopped listening to the rest. Within decades of contact, multiple attempts were made to drain Lake Guatavita and recover the offerings from the bottom. The first recorded attempt was by Hernán Pérez de Quesada in the 1540s, who used a bucket chain of laborers to lower the water level by about 3 meters. They found gold. Not enough to justify the effort, but enough to confirm that the stories were real. In 1580, a merchant named Antonio de Sepúlveda cut a massive notch in the rim of the lake, a notch you can still see today, and drained the water level by roughly 20 meters. More gold was recovered, including a gold staff and an emerald the size of an egg, according to contemporary accounts. But the drainage channel collapsed, killing several workers, and the project was abandoned. The most darkly absurd attempt came in 1898, when a British company called Contractors Limited managed to drain the lake almost entirely using tunnels bored into the lakebed. They succeeded in emptying the water,
But the mud at the bottom, exposed to the equatorial sun, baked into a substance as hard as concrete within hours. By the time equipment was brought in to excavate, the lakebed was impenetrable. The company went bankrupt. The lake slowly refilled. Today, Lake Guatavita is a protected natural and cultural site. Diving, excavation, and any form of treasure hunting have been banned since 1965 by the Colombian government. The gold that was recovered over the centuries, much of it melted down by the Spanish, is scattered across European and Colombian collections. Nobody knows how much remains at the bottom of the lake. Estimates have varied wildly, from tens of millions to billions of dollars, but all of them are speculative. The Muisca raft itself, meanwhile, sits quietly in the Museo del Oro, watched by tourists who often walk past it without understanding what it represents. It is not just a gold figurine.
It is a snapshot of a ceremony that launched 5 centuries of obsession, environmental destruction, and colonial greed. And the ceremony itself was about humility, spiritual cleansing, and the symbolic surrender of material wealth. There is a particular kind of irony in that. The ritual was about giving gold away. The people who heard about it spent centuries trying to get it back. Now, from gold to something even older and stranger. In the same Museo del Oro, and in private collections and museums around the world, there are small gold figurines from the Quimbaya culture that have sparked one of the more unusual debates in the history of archaeology. And what makes the debate unusual is not that the evidence is ambiguous, it is that the objects themselves are so clearly, so recognizably shaped like something they should not possibly depict. The Quimbaya civilization flourished in the Middle Cauca River Valley, in what is now the Colombian coffee-growing region, from roughly the 1st century CE through the Spanish conquest. They were extraordinary goldsmiths. Their work in lost wax casting, a process where a wax model is encased in clay, the wax melted out, and molten gold poured into the void, is among the finest anywhere in the pre-Columbian world. The precision of their craftsmanship is not in dispute. What is in dispute is a specific group of small figurines, typically around 5 to 8 centimeters long, produced in gold or tumbaga. There are several dozen of these objects, found at various Quimbaya sites and now scattered across collections. Most are described in archaeological catalogs as zoomorphic pendants, stylized depictions of birds, fish, or insects meant to be worn as body ornaments. The problem is that some of them do not look like birds, fish, or insects. They look like airplanes. Specifically, they have delta-shaped wings, a vertical tail fin, a horizontal stabilizer, and a fuselage. The proportions on several of the figurines are remarkably close to the profile of a modern fixed-wing aircraft.
Not vaguely suggestive, remarkably close. Now, before anyone leaps to conclusions, these figurines were made between roughly 300 and 1000 CE. Powered flight was not invented until 1903. No serious archaeologist believes the Quimbaya were building airplanes, but the resemblance is real, and it has attracted attention far beyond the archaeological mainstream. In 1994, two German aviation enthusiasts, Peter Belting and Konrad Lubers, built scaled-up radio-controlled models based on the proportions of several of the figurines. They added an engine and a propeller, which the originals obviously do not have, but made no changes to the wing shape, tail configuration, or body proportions. The models flew. They flew well. They performed basic aerobatic maneuvers.
This does not prove that the Quimbaya understood aerodynamics. What it proves is that the shapes of these particular figurines are, whether by coincidence or by design, aerodynamically functional. That is an interesting fact, and it is a fact that the archaeological community has largely dealt with by pointing out that many flying animals, certain species of flying fish, certain winged insects, certain tropical birds, have body plans that are inherently aerodynamic, and that a stylized depiction of such a creature might accidentally produce a shape that works in a wind tunnel. That explanation is probably correct, but probably correct is not the same as fully explained. And the specific combination of features, a delta wing, a vertical stabilizer, and a fuselage without visible animal features on several of the specimens, remains unusual. If you line up Quimbaya zoomorphic pendants that clearly depict identifiable animals alongside the disputed figurines, the disputed ones look different. They look engineered. The mainstream position is that these are stylized animals and that the aircraft resemblance is pareidolia, the human tendency to see familiar patterns in ambiguous shapes. The fringe position is that they depict some form of flying technology. The honest middle ground is simpler. We're looking at objects made by people whose aesthetic vocabulary and symbolic language we do not fully understand, and we are projecting our own visual categories onto their work. The figurines might depict creatures that no longer exist, or spiritual beings, or composite mythological animals that combine features from several species. The Quimbaya did not leave written explanations. We are guessing. And guessing, in archaeology, should always come with a disclaimer. What is not guessing is the craftsmanship. Whatever these figurines depict, the metallurgical skill required to produce them, the precise wax modeling, the even wall thickness, the clean casting lines, is extraordinary. That part is not debated by anyone. Here is where the story of Colombia's hidden past reaches its most literal version of hiding. Because what we are about to discuss is an entire landscape that has, for centuries, been almost impossible to enter. The Darien Gap. It sits at the border of Colombia and Panama, where the South American continent meets Central America. It is roughly 100 to 160 kilometers of roadless, swampy, mountainous jungle, and it is the only break in the Pan-American Highway, a road system that otherwise stretches from Prudhoe Bay in Alaska to Ushuaia at the southern tip of Argentina. Over 30,000 kilometers of highway, interrupted by one stretch of jungle that no engineer has been willing or able to pave. The reasons are partly environmental. The Darien is one of the most biodiverse regions on Earth. It contains wetlands, primary rainforest, and mangrove systems that act as a critical ecological corridor between the continents. Any road would fragment habitats, accelerate deforestation, and almost certainly introduce diseases into isolated indigenous communities, the Emberá, the Wunan, and the Guna, among others. Colombia and Panama have both resisted road construction, citing environmental and public health concerns. International conservation organizations have backed them. But the environmental argument, while genuine, is not the whole story. The Darien has been a frontier zone for centuries, a place where state authority fades and other forces take over. During Colombia's long internal conflict, the gap was controlled at various times by guerrilla groups,
paramilitary organizations, and drug trafficking networks. Even today, irregular armed groups maintain a presence.
And in recent years, the Gap has become one of the most dangerous migration corridors on Earth, with hundreds of thousands of people from Haiti, Venezuela, Cuba, Africa, Asia, and elsewhere, attempting to walk through the jungle to reach Panama and ultimately the United States. The death toll is unknown. Bodies are not recovered from the Darien. The jungle swallows them. What makes the Darien relevant to a discussion of hidden discoveries is that the region has barely been surveyed archaeologically. The indigenous groups who live in the Gap have oral traditions stretching back centuries, describing settlements, trade routes, and sacred sites that have never been mapped or excavated by outside researchers. Spanish colonial records mention attempts to build a route through the Darien as early as the 16th century. Vasco Núñez de Balboa crossed it in 1513 on his way to the Pacific, and several of those expeditions described encountering ruins, abandoned settlements, and artifacts that they did not bother to document in detail because they were looking for gold, not history. In the 20th century, a handful of archaeological surveys were conducted in the Colombian and Panamanian portions of the Gap, and they found ceramic traditions, lithic tools, and settlement patterns that suggested continuous human habitation going back several thousand years. But these were small-scale projects, limited by access, funding, and security. No comprehensive archaeological survey of the Darien has ever been completed. What is in there? What did the pre-Columbian cultures who lived in one of the most impenetrable landscapes in the Western Hemisphere build, create, and leave behind? The honest answer is that we do not know. Not because the evidence does not exist, but because the Darien, like so many places in Colombia, has not been properly looked at yet. And maybe that is the thread that connects all 7 of these discoveries. A coal mine reveals the largest snake that ever lived. A jungle conceals a city older than Machu Picchu. An ocean guards a treasure ship worth billions. Cliff faces in the Amazon hold tens of thousands of paintings that predate agriculture. Underground chambers in the mountains contain painted tombs built by a people whose name is lost. A gold figurine in a museum encodes a ritual that launched the most destructive treasure hunt in Western history. And a 100-kilometer stretch of jungle between 2 continents remains, in the 21st century, essentially unexplored. Colombia is not hiding anything. That framing is wrong. What is happening is simpler and more uncomfortable. Colombia is a country where the landscape itself, mountains, jungle, ocean, volcanic rock, swamp, has been doing the hiding for centuries. And we are only now beginning to find what it has kept. If this video changed the way you think about Colombia, share it with someone who still pictures the country as nothing more than what they have seen in headlines. Because the real story is older, stranger, and far more interesting than anything the news has ever covered. The 7 discoveries in this video are all real. They are all documented, and not one of them has been fully explained. The snake that should not have been that large. The city no one knew was there. The ship no one can agree on who owns. The paintings no one has finished counting. The tombs no one can attribute to a named culture. The gold that started a legend, and the jungle that has never been properly searched. Colombia is one of the most archaeologically underexplored countries on Earth relative to its size, its ecological diversity, and the depth of its human history. Every year, new finds emerge. Every decade, the map gets redrawn. And every time someone assumes the story is complete, the ground opens up and says otherwise. What do you think is still out there? Not in Egypt, not in Peru, in Colombia, in the mountains, under the canopy, at the bottom of the water. What has the landscape been keeping that we have not thought to look for yet? Tell me in the comments, because if the pattern of the last 50 years holds, whatever you imagine is probably less strange than what will actually be found.